good morning, Jan Recker.
Hey Nick, how you doing?
Well, we've got a couple of guests here with us, Alok Gupta and Andreas Fügener. Thanks for joining us. We want to talk about your paper here in MIS Quarterly on Borgs. And and I'll tell you what, Recker, this is this is a paper that when I first read it, I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I have to say, it has impacted my thinking as much as any paper. Like, it keeps coming back to me, right? This idea that we're becoming Borgs and that we're assimilating to the AI, right?
Yeah, you know what? Like, I think that there's a couple of stories here. I mean, the first story is really about that term Borg, right? So I don't know about you, but I associate it with the Star Trek. The Borgs, which were my favorite enemy in the Next Generation series.
Yeah,
but I think. Yeah, I'm a nerd, but some of our co-editors had no idea. They had no idea. They associated with cyborgs in some sort of more general sense, but not with the Borgs, that particular species from the sci-fi series. So Andreas and Alok, I was right? This is a Star Trek reference, isn't it?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having us, Andreas speaking. You're absolutely right. And actually, the same happened among the author team. So not all of us were familiar with it. When I first talked to Alok and told him, this is our main results from the very first experiment, so we want to make a paper out of it, he said, oh, that's the Borgs, right? So, and I had to grab my phone and look it up.
And actually, wait,
Alok's
the nerd.
Alok was a nerd. You didn't know the Borgs? Oh, that's fantastic. I thought it might have been the other way around.
Actually, I was the one not knowing the Borgs.
I am a big Star Trek fan. So, when the backstory on the paper is that we've been working in AI and human issues for a while. And when Andreas discussed this set of results, we were at a conference and we were talking about these results. I said, oh my God, people are turning into Borgs. And he said, what? That's how we even have a figure, but that was a bit too much, I guess, to put in the paper. But the initial version had a Star Trek kind of a reference where Patrick Stewart, who was one of the captains, turns
so
that
must be an age thing, right? Andreas, I wager you're a little bit younger than all of us here, so maybe you're not quite the next generation thing too. For me, that was a big TV series when I was growing up. And I guess my sister, she was a real Trekkie, went to conventions and all of this, and I did too.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh, wow. But wait, Andreas, do you have a little bit of gray in your beard that I see on Zoom?
Yeah, just a tiny little bit. I guess that's the kids.
So you don't color your beard like Recker does, because he has this brown beard. He colors it.
Actually, I should start. So I turned 40 this week. So I guess now I'm officially allowed to dye my beard.
Yeah. No, okay, but in all seriousness, I mean, you mentioned that you were working on sort of human and AI issues beforehand, and you happened to get results, and then what? You saw the call for papers, and you thought, hey, that's a good fit. How where did the paper originate from?
Actually, that's not quite right that we got the results. Actually, it was very purposeful based on what we had found earlier. What we had found earlier was that people just aren't good delegators. They don't know what they're good at, what they're bad at. They can't assess their own capabilities very well. So that was the original paper, which actually Nick saw an earlier version of that paper in a conference. But when we looked at that, we said, okay, what is happening to people as they are interacting with AI and advanced technologies in decision-making environments? And we looked at all kinds of literature. And of course, later editors pointed out some literature which was relevant, but it didn't connect to us initially. But originally, we couldn't find anything that talked about specifically about how or what happens to human beings as they are being assisted with technology. Not what happens to their decision making, but what happens to decision quality has been done a lot, but not what happens to their decision making process was. And so our purpose in doing this was that can we look at this, we also recognize from our earlier research that there are complementarities between humans and machines. So we wanted to see what happens to this complementarity, and that's where we started. But the results kind of surprised us. We did not think that it would be that stark. So that's sort of where we started thinking about molding it into a paper. Earlier, we were thinking that maybe we'll just have it as a side result somewhere, whatever comes out.
The issue is that we have always gotten dumber because of technologies, in the sense that that our unique knowledge always, it's like a moving bar. We always go some different place because the technology gets black boxed, and then we can just ignore it, and then our cognition goes elsewhere. But that's not what you found, right? What you found is we actually get dumber with our unique knowledge, which to me that's the thing that's been impacting my thinking.
So basically, we show that humans get smarter, but they get less diverse, right? So we're smart, but we're all in the same way smart. And what we basically did, and I think this was one of our good moments in the very early phase of this project, was we just tried to simulate some wisdom of crowds. And then we basically saw that there's no more potential in crowd decision making. Well, it is huge. If you just have all those humans and let them make decisions, then crowd has huge potential. But those kind of Borg humans who get AI assistance, basically there was no more potential of working together because they are all very similar.
Yeah.
So and for us, it was a stark result because, many other researchers, for example, McAfee and Ben Jobson, have been talking about carving out work for machines and humans and putting it together, right? So modularization of work and putting together the best. But if humans become all alike, then you can also replace that with machines. So, it's just, for us, it was a very enlightening sort of a result where we started making us thinking very, very much like you, Nick, that will that be a sustainable solution even? Because if everyone is behaving alike, then we can just replace it with machines. So that's what worried us. That's what sort of started us in this direction, and trying to figure out how can really machines be helpful in the long run. So those are some of the results, more results in the paper, which sort of look at how does AI provide smart assistance to humans so that they don't lose their uniqueness, right? Or takes advantage of their uniqueness in providing selective advice and suggestions and things like that.
Personalization and some of the
personalization. Yeah. So there is a way to use it, but that wasn't obvious to us right at the beginning.
See, what I find interesting is that you have this counterintuitive, non-obvious, sort of unexpected result, and we all know that. When people talk about publishing, when they talk about making big contributions, number one, the advice is always, of course, to focus on these things, right? Focus on the counterintuitive stuff, focus on the surprising, unexpected. On the other hand, I think it's fair to say that these are extremely difficult to publish, right? So I always find that a big tension that, it's very easy to say, guys, go out and focus on the unexpected, the hypothesis that they didn't get support and so forth. But the reality is that's very difficult. Now you fall into that genre, right? I mean, you had a counterintuitive, a very sort of unexpected result, but you pushed that through. So would you agree that that was particularly difficult to publish, or did you find a strategy that in the end that worked for you in sort of highlighting the uniqueness here?
So I would, Andreas, maybe I would say something, and then since you dealt with many of these difficult issues in a masterful way, I would just give you my general impressions about difficulty, and not just for this paper, but similar type of papers elsewhere. And that comes from the fact that what we were doing, to me, a theoretical paradigm is something that I can generalize in any circumstances. And we come from that. But what happens with that, because in research, people look at specific dimensions or, in a very, you build sort of theories that are applicable in a certain bounded kind of manner in a given large problem. we want to connect to that. Whereas this is so general, it applies to human thinking. And there are many theories that inform this or can inform this. So we are not used to, as a field, thinking about theories to start with an empirical finding and say, okay, there are a lot of theoretical bases here, and let's explore all of them. We want to first build a theoretical basis and say, okay, here, we show that. And to me, that has always been frustrating to a certain extent, but also fulfilling. So ultimately, I mean, I'm delighted with the product, right? But the process wasn't easy because we did not know, I did not want to, as you know now, paper has a mathematical model. And I just to the readers, that people who are listening to this podcast, I want to say that you can just completely skip the mathematical model, right?
That's so awesome.
You don't need to read it.
The
you
model
won't learn anything. It just provides that theoretical normative precision in terms of, what the boundary conditions of this finding is. And where it might not be applicable.
Well, and that was your answer to us editors pushing you on theory. Yeah. You're like, we don't want to do theory. We want to give you our empirical results. So you're forcing us to do theory. Here's a model. Here's a formal model. Now we have theory, right? That's what happened.
Yes. I would again say to readers, it's completely non-essential to read it. In fact, you should read the paper's results and build your own theories, because I'm sure you can come up with other models and other contingencies that you can define for a particular environment or a particular context. So while it's very general, and theory shows that, but it can certainly be read without it. Andreas, sorry to cut you off. I know that you wanted to say something.
Basically, this goes in the same way. And so I think we had difficulties telling people that what we find is not just, relevant in this very specific setting, but generalized as well. And I guess the model helps because the model is very abstract, and we can basically show everything that we see in the data. We can show it analytically in the model as well, right? So we have this additional 17 pages of formulas, and I guess nothing is very complicated here, but it shows what you see is not just a relic of the way we designed the experiments. So I guess it is helpful after all, but it makes it, of course, more difficult to read.
Let me add some views on this, because my position is a little bit different here from Nick's, because at that time I was basically a colleague of Andreas and Wolf, right? So I wasn't actually involved in the editorial decision. So I was always a little bit of an outsider. I saw the versions coming in and I saw the discussion that were going on, but didn't participate. So this is where I sit on this. I actually thought that adding the formal theory at the later stage, at a fairly late stage of the review process, I thought it was a wonderful compromise, to be honest. Yeah, I give you that it can be distracting, but on the other hand, it's a type of mathematical beauty that we don't see a lot in IS papers. So from that vantage point, I think it's a wonderful example to other people's how you can add theoretical contribution, theoretical specificity, through other means than by written arguments, by mathematical arguments. So that there's a beauty to this, because in most of the papers that I read, I'm not saying it's nowhere, but the ones that I see don't have that. And it comes with precision and specificity, right? So it's a very different level, a different form of theorizing, and I like that. The downside of that is, of course, as Andreas just said, it's 17 pages, and not everyone likes equations, in our field. We got to be honest here. But Andreas, to your point, I also thought that it's a very powerful way to show that, no, this is not a spurious finding. This is not by happenstance or by design flaw or by whatever else. It adds consistency, right? Because you have now a mathematical formalism and you have empirical results, and they're consistent. So I thought that was a killer, so to speak, right? It really took the fire out of the entire process.
So yeah, and I'm not saying that this didn't improve the paper in its form, right? I mean, I'm really proud of the paper. I think if anybody can read the paper and take a lot out of it, all I was saying was that it probably makes paper less accessible to some other people if they start focusing on the abstraction part. And it's not necessary to get understanding of powerful results from the paper. I am not sure what's a good compromise. I mean, MISQ is wonderful in that sense that we can publish these long papers. Its paper is whatever, 54, 55 pages long. Many of the journals won't even allow that long a paper, right? So it would be hard to publish such a paper anywhere else. So we are thankful that we were at the right place, and we were thankful to the editors that despite I guess some concerns, they were willing to give us a chance to prove what we were saying right from the start, that this is not just empirical results. And as you know, we were quite adamant about not potentially looking at it as just as a note, because to us it was not simply it was not just empirical findings. It was just not just some experimental results.
So let me give you a little backstory there for anybody listening. What we did in the review process is they had these wonderful experiments we liked from day one, right? That we thought were cool. I don't think anybody on the review or the editorial team or the reviewers or anybody was in any way not favorable towards this paper. The issue at MISQ, so first off, you mentioned the 50 plus pages, we got in before the new policy change. So actually MISQ has changed policy, and there are strict limits to page lengths and that sort of thing, even in review packages and everything. So our process was before this. However, what we did was we're like, all right, so these are great empirical findings. We love it. If it's just empirical, do a research note. If you are going to do a full paper, you need to make a theoretical contribution. And that was the discussion from the reviewers. So that's what Alok is referring to, because, it looks like, no, this is important. It's not just a research note. And that's the one thing I did want to talk to you about. I don't look at a research note as any worse than a full paper. If you look at, Stephen Johnson and those guys just had this MISQ paper that's being picked up by CNN and all over the place, right? It's on fake news.
In echo chambers.
Yeah, echo chambers, that was it. And it was a research note. They brought it down to a research note because it's primarily empirical. It's out there. It's getting I think research notes are great. As a matter of fact, and I've told Recker this on the podcast before, I think more of our papers should be research notes, so we're not forcing authors to try and put theory on top of their empirical. They should just publish their empirical findings.
So, Nick, my objection to it was not because I feel research notes are any less, but I really believe that we have a very solid theoretical background, because what we were doing is basically, as we referred in bits and pieces, is based on human nature, how humans make decisions and how machines make decisions. Right, which is what we put in the mathematical model ultimately, right? So to me, it was very theoretical, and that's what, my frustration was, that how could I explain it better so that it connects with, and this is the challenge when you have, and I don't know what the review team was, but my suspicion is that they were all from a very different background, right? Even the reviewers were from a very different background. And of course, the editorial team was quite diverse. So how do you connect with such a diverse set of people at a theoretical sort of underpinning, is coming up with a theoretical underpinning that connects with them? Because everyone, as I said, could take a theoretical perspective and connect to it, and be frustrated that we are not doing that, right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, this is the problem with qualitative research in general, because anytime as I've done a good amount of qualitative research, and anytime you put a finding, that people will say, well, but you could have used this other theoretical language, right, for your, so that's something we always wrestle with. And I'll tell you what, your paper actually inspired me big time, because I have another qualitative paper. And what we're doing, we have a pretty strong team. We have some Germans on the team. What we're doing is we're putting formal models around our argument. So we're actually mathematically defining our qualitative arguments, which it's ending up being around options. So we're using financial options and some of that mathematics around financial options, right? So we're playing with those, and it was entirely because of this paper that I'm like, we can include formal models with empirical data, and why not? I don't know who's going to review it, but
Andreas will review it, so he'll volunteer.
Andreas, I know you're out of the operations management field originally, right? So you've also done work on supply chains and so forth, and you've published a lot in these journals as well, whereas I haven't, for example. Can you talk a little bit about the differences? So when the process now for MIS Quarterly versus the process you may have had in, I don't know, Journal of Operations Management or wherever else, or 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 wherever else you may have published. Do you think there's a lot of difference?
I'm not sure if the process of the special issue was kind of the same as it usually is for MISQ. So, it was extremely fast, right? And it was extremely, I would even say it was stressful for us. So we did some of the revision rounds in 2 months, and that was basically, like this model we spoke about, I think we had 4 or 5 weeks to do this. And this was 4 or 5
What do you
weeks
think about that fast pace?
All in all, after finishing it, I think it's great because, this paper could have been like 3 or 4 years in the process, right? So we had multiple rounds. We even had like intermediate rounds with Ben, like discussing, this is the way we want to approach this. Do you think this will fly, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the price you pay for such high pace is basically that you have to deprioritize all other work. I found this helpful. Yeah, I for Journal of Operations Management that you just mentioned, I once waited for 9 months to get my paper back, and then we got a reject and resubmit, and then we revised it, waited for another 5 months, and got another reject and resubmit. Right? So
yeah.
Next thing you know, 2 years is gone. Yeah.
The backstory there is, of course, that we deliberately designed it to be like this, right? So we wanted to have a process innovation. We wanted to see whether it's possible. And in so doing, of course, it was very taxing. And in a way, we had when we began, we had a separate meeting with all the AEs, and we briefed them and said, look, guys, this is how it's going to be. You really got to work with us here. But, what we didn't foresee, of course, was that it also happened during the pandemic. In hindsight, of course, it was very stressful for all of us. It was stressful for us internally as well. Alok, you mentioned the diversity in the editorial team alone. That was difficult to deal with. And I didn't quite foresee this, but of course it was difficult. We were 4 very different people with very different viewpoints and expectations and so forth. That was a problem. The pandemic, of course, was a problem for everyone. But we were very conscious about how the authors in particular, of course, felt about this cycle. So that's why we're asking everyone, how was it for you guys? But the ambition was, I guess, to see whether why can't we publish good work in a year? It's still a year. It's still, to me, outside, it sounds horribly long, doesn't it? Yeah. It's so, anyway, so it's okay, but it's not perfect, I think.
Our case, I think the first revision round was basically writing a new paper. And we doubled the size. And I think we have to say a thank you and a little story to the reviewers as well, because we added a lot of content based on referee comments, and a lot of it got cut out in the last round because, we had 55 pages, then we added 17 pages of models. So we had to cut out another 17 pages.
Yeah.
And we had to streamline everything a lot. I think in the end, everything makes sense. It's a nice flow now. But of course, everybody has cool ideas, what could be interesting as well. We did a lot of those stuff, and not all of it could make it in the final version.
You need to write some sort of, management piece out of it, right? Some sort of more popular.
See, what I find sometimes that the computer sciences is an interesting model. Sometimes they write a paper and a technical report that goes with the paper. I always thought that is a very nice workaround for these situations, right? So in their sense, they have a 20-page paper, but they have, a 70-page technical report that gets referenced. And that's just a PDF that lies somewhere. But that has a lot of, let's say, the mathematical details, or it would have more simulation results, or it would have proof of the algorithms, or whatever else. So, that would be a nice, I always thought that's a nice idea how they handle things. Every now and then, I think they do some things better, as you know.
Yeah, we even thought about picking up your note idea, making 2 short papers, right? Because we have a bit of 2 stories. The one story is like the problem itself. Hey, if you have humans advised by AI, first of all, there is complementarity. AI works very differently than human decision making. So there should always be cases when one can learn from the other. So it's technically a good thing, but they will lose human knowledge, right? Unique human knowledge. And that means, like in a group, they will lose power. And I think that was kind of the first story. And then the second story that developed during the revision rounds was, hey, what can we do against it? Like, can we do something to overcome this? Where we came up with
the last hypothesis.
AI learning about the human and personalizing the advice. Yeah, it could have been 2 short papers instead of 1 long one, I guess. But I mean, with the model, everything flows quite neatly in the end, I would say.
As a scholar and a researcher, I look at it and think it's beautiful the way it is. I love the formalization, and I love this set of experiments, the way you derive them from the form, and then you have very nice experiments addressing each one. It's elegant, right? But look, I get the sense that you're a little frustrated that in doing this kind of thorough elegance, what you've done is kind of made it less accessible or less readable or less interesting.
I'm worried. I'm not frustrated about it. I'm worried, because I really think that the paper could be inspiration, if not foundation, for a lot of work that needs to be done in this area if we have to design these work environments where humans are going to be working with machines. And that's what is going to happen probably in the next 2-3 decades at least, right? I mean, until AI completely takes over, right? But in the interim, for several decades, that's what is going to happen. And to design it properly, I think we need to do a lot of research. And I think we have some very good starting points. And I don't want people to be afraid of the mathematics there. That's all. But I agree with you. I love, given that I started out as an analytical modeler, I love what we have in the paper, right? I mean, when I started out, I couldn't have written a paper like this. Now, of course, I'm very open about these multi-method papers and things like that. And I love it, and so I want to thank the review team and the editorial team for pushing us and forcing us to do things that we didn't want to do necessarily. But the end result is great. So I'm not frustrated about the process. I'm just, I guess at some point you guys mentioned that you're not in favor of constructive reviews because people should write their papers on their own. And I think there is a role for constructive reviews because it can, to me, it can deliver magic. It can get best out of people because we have a perspective that we want to share, but it does not necessarily connect with everyone unless you do these other things, right? So, and you need as a, because I'm not a qualitative researcher, I'm not, I've read a lot of behavioral work, but I'm not a behavioral researcher necessarily. But to connect to those researchers, I do need that constructive feedback in order to go there, reach there. So I mean, I know that you guys probably meant something else there, but it's just that.
No, I mean, you're right. It's interesting. I think that you're worried. I see where you're coming from. You think that the length of the paper, the complexity of it all, may turn off. I see it differently. I think this is sending a very positive signal. I always think of papers sometimes as signaling to the community what can be done, what can be published. So in this sense, this is wonderful that we can say, look, we have 55 pages. We can't just use it to rattle off on stuff, but you can put 3 experiments in the simulation formula models into this. We can do some big, bolster, very robust research. And that to me is very different from spending 40 pages on one survey, or one case or whatever else.
Although I will tell you this, you used MTurk data. What's your thought on that? Not only as authors, but as editors. I mean, it's wonderful. It's abundant. We do, MTurkers are gaming it. I think the bar is higher for MTurk data. What are your thoughts on using MTurk data in research and the challenges?
Yeah, I do think that if you don't have checks that check whether the work is being done sincerely, then you have a problem. The internal consistency is the main issue with MTurk subjects, right? So, and we did in our paper have internal consistency. I don't know whether it is now there in the final paper or not, but we did look at the internal consistency of the decision making, that they are paying attention, they're doing what a rational human being would do. That's what we want. We don't want people randomly doing stuff, right? So those internal consistency checks, as long as they are there, I'm all for using MTurk, because it, especially during the pandemic, there is nothing else you could have done. I mean, if we were relying on lab subjects, we couldn't have done anything, or at least no additions to the paper, right? So, so I'm all for it, as long as we make sure that subjects are behaving in the manner lab subjects would behave.
I mean, the subjects I used to work with before were basically university students. And I think university students might be a bit more consistent than MTurk workers, but of course less diverse. And well, basically when we designed our task, our experiment with like classification of images, we thought that using MTurk workers is basically very close to a field experiment, because this is what they actually do for a living, right?
Right,
it's
exactly.
Very similar to the task they do. So especially for this task, I think it was a great fit. But yeah, as Alok said, and actually that got worse the last year, probably due to the pandemic, that more and more low-income service workers lost their jobs and now working on MTurk, maybe doing like multiple tasks at the same time. I guess, let's call it noise went up, right? So there's more unreliability in the data. So, but I mean, in the end, you can just increase the sample size if noise goes up, and as long as you have those kind of consistency, I think it's still fine.
There are these platforms of other folks, right, that are trying to do things similar with. Do you have any experience with these, or are they better? Are they worse? It seems like everybody's accepting MTurk nowadays, right?
Yeah, I mean, MTurk has the greatest number of workers. I guess there might be platforms, but they try to do the same with MTurk too, right? There's like some platforms who kind of only provide you selected MTurk workers who have like a certain quality of work. I guess you could reduce noise by using other subjects, those other platforms, but I'm not sure if this has any significant impact on the kind of research you can do with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree with Andreas that, you can certainly use them for robustness checks, if there is concern about MTurk. I mean, if you don't have a way to check internal consistency otherwise, right? I mean, one way to do that would be to put it on different platforms and see whether you get consistent results. So it's a good thing in general.
Most of them could work as well. So I read some papers like trying to compare different platforms, and my main finding was that most of them work.
Okay. So I know we only said we take a limited amount of your time here, so we probably want to start wrapping up, but I wanted to leave with, we've talked to a couple author teams, and you mentioned this fast pace. So we actually have one author team that said they followed an agile approach. Another one was doing Gantt charts.
Yes.
They're doing, I know Wolf and Alok, you guys have worked quite a bit together in the past. And then like, how did the team come together? And then how did you manage this fast cycle? I know Alok doesn't sleep. Did he just stay up all night and do it? Or like, what happened? How did you manage that?
Actually, having this time difference, really helped because Andreas could work at a different time and then I could look at it and things like that. So that really helped. So we had nearly 24-hour cycles, so we had more time to work on it in some senses. And then we had coordination meetings in between. But I think, again, because we are such a diverse team, Wolf and I are not alike. I mean, I hope I have taught him some things, but certainly I've learned a lot from him as well. But we have very different skills. So do Andreas and I. We have, of course, common grounds, but because of our different sort of skill sets, we are able to do things and surprise each other, and then say, okay, here is something cool, and we get. So what happened was that we were so excited at every stage of this work that I think we put in more time than we would have otherwise.
It's the fun project on your plate.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me proud. Actually, that makes me proud that he put more time than usual into this particular paper. Yeah, that's great.
And it's not just because of the fast pace. It's just actually because we were so excited about this work itself. So
I think the fast pace matters, though, because I think the first year or so of any project, I'm still very excited about, right? It's year 4 that starts getting to be like, oh, geez, I have to see this paper again, right? So, yeah, I think
that is true.
I agree.
That is true.
But no, it's been, not only you're excited, we're excited as well. We're very proud that we can publish it. We're very proud that it comes out fast. It'll come out in September. It'll make for great reading. And it's the view that we had on all of this is we always saw this is in the portfolio, which the authors obviously don't, right? And we always thought that's a wonderful addition to the very diverse set of other papers, all of which are about managing AI, but from different perspectives, different methods, different theories, different everything. So that made it a very enjoyable experience, and I hope that'll show in this special issue.
Yeah, I think this is a best paper candidate for MISQ. I mean, we all have a couple best paper candidates for MISQ this year, and I think this is one of them. I think it's a really unique and elegant paper. And it's one that stays in your brain.
Nick, and I want to thank you guys and Radhika and Ben. As internally frustrated as we sometimes feel, we really have to thank you for pushing us to get where the paper ultimately went. It is really one of the finest pieces of work. I didn't think that anything could surpass my dissertation work, even though hardly anybody can read it. But this really is something that I'm very, very proud of.
That's great. Thank you. So thanks, guys.
And get some sleep now, Alok.
Yeah, get some sleep.
Maybe sleep more than 2 hours.
Go and celebrate a little bit. Thanks for coming on the show. And yeah, we look forward to reading all these papers in this issue when it comes out.
So do we.
Me too.